future opportunities and challenges faced the third sector. The main reason for us offering the session today is that SBO have been working on futures agendas for a while, maybe about a year or slightly longer. We've worked across a couple of themes that maybe we'll mention a bit later, but I think we're keen to hear what people in the sector feel are the main opportunities and challenges that face the sector, and for that to guide our futures work. So we hope that as a result of today's meeting, we'll break into small groups and discuss all the questions presented in the agenda, that we'll maybe be able to steer our work towards some more focused workshops on topics that people in the sector are really concerned about, with expert speakers, and to help us get a bit of a stronger feel for the areas that the sector is concerned about and what sort of things we should be concerned about in those areas, or where the opportunities lie. A few people have joined us on a webinar today. One person so far. We'll see if we get. We're expecting 3, so we'll see. So they'll make up one of the groups, and if there's only a couple of people, then maybe some people from the group here will join the webinar group, which Ruchir will lead. And I think Ruchir said to everyone that the session is live streamed, and so far everyone has said they're okay with that, but you could change your mind. Just let us know if you don't mind. And I think also we are a small group, and we are going to spend most of the time in smaller groups. So if you want to, get more coffee or whatever at any point, then that's fine. Just feel free to do that. Okay, so I'll hand over to Ruchir for a little icebreaker.
Okay, I guess just to introduce myself, my name is Ruchir Shah. I head up policy at SCVO, and I've been asked by Shelley if I can do a weekend of icebreaker. What I thought we would do is, if it's okay with everyone, over the next 10 minutes, what we'll do, if for about 5 minutes we could just maybe, if you could speak to somebody next year and just find out a bit more about them, and then swap over, and then we'll go around the room. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the person to introduce the person you spoke to. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So 5 minutes. Thanks.
Okay. been there for a year, then London for a year. So it's been a bit of a years then, but we are for lots of it's not necessarily directly on yeah, so I think, but to be honest, I was thinking about this, I think that, yeah, I really So my Thanks very much. We're sorry to stop the conversation in mid-flow. Thank you. So what I thought we'd do is just maybe go around the room and if you maybe just introduce the person you're speaking to what their interest is in this event and just should we start?
Sure. So So this is Lucy from the Lothian Centre for Inclusive Living, which I did write down. I know that's cheating. Which does a lot of work in supporting people with disabilities in the community, making sure that their funding is used in order to get correct care, I guess, for them. Working with getting social workers who come in and support them, helping them select correctly and manage those relationships a little bit.
Yeah.
This feels like a really hard test.
Interpretation.
Yes, and liaising with, I'm going to put Edinburgh Council to try and make sure that they are doing things correctly, and occasionally banging head against a wall, it sounds like. But, you know, for supporting important work.
I also thought that the other advantage of doing it this way around is because it's being live streamed on YouTube, right? So if somebody says, actually, you know, then they won't blame the other person for looking at it. That's true.
This is Gregor. He works for the Scottish Sport Association, which is not Sport Scotland.
Nope.
And yeah, trying to retain all that stuff about sport. He's a policy and communications officer.
Yes.
In a small team, and they liaise with all the little sports bodies, including the aero modelers who go and fly aeroplanes in fields. And they do lots of sport funding, the Scottish government, lobbying.
Lots of stuff. Okay.
And he's quite new at it. Before that, he was a journalist in London.
Oh, I'm John. 12 years in the sector. Briefly worked at, not me, Lucy. Put my Lucy hat back on. 12 years in the sector. Knows a lot more about it than I do. I'm 6 weeks in. So no questions this way. Thanks.
This is Rachel. She works for the Community Transport Association as Director for Scotland and has only been in the post since Thursday. So fairly new.
Yeah, beating you
That's
there.
even
Sorry.
better.
Sorry.
I'm an old hand now.
Fairly new. So the organisation is a membership organisation and crosses over between the public sector, private sector, works a lot with the membership in terms of taking policies forward, challenges to government ministers. And she's currently knee-deep in paint and wallpaper and various things because she's renovating her house with her boyfriend.
A beautiful, beautiful story of cement dust. It's lovely. This is Margaret from Volunteer Scotland. She's Strategic Engagement Manager. Sounds very fancy. She's been with them for 10 years, but this is actually a new role for her. And as part of that, she runs Volunteers Week, which is really exciting because I've done stuff previously with Volunteers Week and sort of feels a bit like meeting a celebrity, actually, putting a face to the whole campaign. We're going to be talking about volunteering that we've done and sort of crossover between our organisations.
Hi, this is Ilsa, and she's a research officer for SCDO. She helps the third sector tell their story, impacts, happenings, trends, and communicates their actions. Yeah.
This is Paula, who's the Development Manager for Advice UK. We're a national body with 800 members, but in Scotland we've got 60 members. So they provide training, insurance, and all the sort of back office stuff that makes life a bit easier for advice organisations and lets them focus on clients. Those very importantly, things like standards. Paula also looks after her members here in Scotland, supports them, and is also interested in any sort of trends and patterns and events that are maybe of interest to their members in terms of maybe what's going to be in the horizon in the future. Funding and issues like that came up in our discussion.
This is Jo, and she is employer engagement partner within the School of Applied Social Sciences. That's quite good. With Edinburgh Napier University. And I was quite surprised to sit inside something like Jo this morning because you don't expect universities to be here, so it's very nice. The sense of having someone looking outside in, and it's a relatively new role.
Yes, new, we're all new. So this is Karen Nicholson from Frontline 5, which is a full service homeless charity. So that's my learning point already. That's the shorthand for we offer a whole remit of services for our client group. So we ended up talking internships and Santander funding and young people coming into the businesses and bringing a fresh perspective. So thank you for allowing me to join. I'm just keen to learn about whether there are any future skills needs and what our students should be bringing to the sector as they enter it.
No, we're delighted to have you.
This is Murray. He's currently doing maternity cover for Shelley Gray at the Core Foundation, doing external relations. We used to work together at SVA, so we just had a little bit of a gossip. Sorry. And I was late, so apologies.
After what name?
I'm Jenny.
This is Jenny. We were talking about her writing books because, as well as being a policy officer at SVO, she's trying to be a novelist.
Yeah, I'm writing a near future feminist thriller at the moment, which you can all talk to me about afterwards if you're all interested. Sorry.
Okay, so this is Shelley, who is part of the SVO policy team. Shelley is leading on the future conversations for SVO, so basically she's very keen to hear ideas and concerns about the sector today, and hopefully that will help her making some work for her.
Yes, I'm very keen to be helped to take that on. And this is Rachel. Rachel's quite new to SVO. She's a policy officer who focuses on workforce, but she's also interested in how Brexit might have an impact on the future, AI, and she's interested in the future of employability in general.
Feeling like I've been here forever. This is Jane Ferguson. Jane's been working in the corporate world around improvement and lean. She has moved on from that role that she had and is now considering inroads into the third sector. But she's very involved locally, has been working with a local trust in Dunfermline around regeneration, and is interested in finding out more about the sector.
And this is Pat Armstrong, who has been in the sector for like 30 years and has loads of experience. She's now chief exec for
Cosco.
SVO, it's easy to spell and to say, Cosco, which is the body for the chief execs of all the voluntary organisations. So she helps develop the chief execs and has 500 members. And they run events, they run 50 events a year, and support those chief execs.
Great, and I've got online here Janine Valentine. And Janine, just text me if I say anything wrong. But Janine works for the National Trust for Scotland, and been particularly looking at how we can maybe look forward beyond Brexit, and what we need to do to go together in order to survive through all the challenges we're facing in the future that's coming up. So, and I don't know if Janine wants to come in and say anything as well. No, okay. Right, so that's us.
Okay, right, we'll move on to the next section. So we'll stay in the big group for this. So it's just an opportunity for everybody to write down, what's your biggest hope for the third sector in the next 10 years? And there should be some post-its scattered around. So we do hopes in yellow, that can be hopeful. And then your biggest fear for the sector in the next 10 years, we'll do that in orange. And then we'll pop them up on the board there. We'll see if they'll stick on there, hopefully. And we can run through some of them. I think it gives everybody a chance to have a bit of a think before we move into the smaller section. So hope's on yellow and fear's on
That's really
orange.
realistic.
No? Who knows what the future holds?
Just one of each.
If you have more ideas, you can do more, and then just pop up there. Yeah.
We already do things so well, there's only me currently. It's my very no, not. No, I'm Wall Street.
But it seems like a lot of the hopes maybe around long-term funding and sustainability, volunteer participation. So maybe some of the things we'd expected, but then on the other side, a lot of the fears as well is about funding and competition within the sector, and then lack of volunteers, Brexit in general, uncertainty. So it seems like some of the, there's quite a lot of crossover in the main themes around what people hope for, strongly linked to their fears. One other one that I'll read out since Janine's on that, and she's online, is she feels worried about the possibility of a recession. And could that drive down the environmental standards, etc. So I think now people can look at them a bit more if they want to later, but then we'll just move into the workshop groups. So we'll have one group on the table over here. You can have one group in the room at the back there, and then a couple of people can join Ruchia and Janine. So you just, we do like this sort of side goes to the room at the back, this sort of side goes to here, and then the people closest can join Ruchia.
We're in the
Very friendly. Brings your pet to I think we might have to pinch you.
That's right.
Too many people.
Do you want another SPV?
Maxine, I don't know what I'm doing.
Neither do I. I'm only just coming from holiday.
I'm not coming and listening, so that's.
I don't know if I should be. So you read my little piece. He's the men's man. I'm that's fine. Yes.
I'll give you an extra map.
So we've got the future trends map. In fact, what I'll do, I'll share the map so that you can see that. Hopefully you can still hear us in the conversation. So I'll share the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put it on screen here as well so you can see it.
There was a link. There
Yes.
was a link in here.
All right.
So this is from the Civil Society Futures Commission. It's part of their resource plan, Julian. And she was using this for all the conversations that they were having. So basically it's part of the workshop act use, and it's an analysis that they've done to try and spark conversations. I think they add to it as they pick up more from or they were adding to it as they picked up more from the conversations. I don't think you can see through it, but it gives you a sense of things. Yeah.
not sure if it's on there, but one of the things that struck me in terms of trends and the possibility of a recession is that there was a study done after the last downturn, which showed that although in the sector we had less money and less hope, the impact hadn't been fully felt on delivery of services because the people that were left were working even harder and trying to pick it up. And they were digging into reserves, but that wasn't sustainable. So I think for me, the worrying trend is that because we're already trying to do more with less, if there's another recession, then, you know, I mean, one of the things I'm finding with chief execs is a real risk of burnout just now. And that building resilience, but you know, people are working as smart as they possibly can, and there isn't any slack there if things get more difficult. So for me, that's, even as an eternal optimist, if I was asked what was my, you know, the most worrying trend, for me that trend is people can't spread themselves any more thinly, so it will start having more of an impact in the front line. But I feel I should counter that with an optimistic one. Which I suppose for me is that I think as a sector, which showed from your recent study around, you know, you've got the image of the mountain that things are kind of tough, but then you've got the bit that people are still feeling optimistic. So I think as a sector, we're used to ducking and diving and doing anything that needs to be done and being resilient and bouncing back.
But why is the sector feeling optimistic about the future? Do they know something that we don't?
I think it's probably the inherent belief in people doing good, and you have to hang on to that, and you know, good will prevail. I think maybe our sector's more open to feeling like that than the other ones, because we're working with, you know, people in that sense of being able to make a difference. I might be wrong.
I have a sense of optimism too, because I think Scotland generally has the right values and is trying to do the right thing as a country, as a nation. And just from locally in Dunfermline, there's just so much collaboration and will to make things better, and you know, that's on the community engagement side rather than necessarily a charity. But I feel positive too.
Thing is, right, if as Janine says, you know, we as a sector are resilient, and you know, we attract people to our sector who, you know, can maybe bring resilience and everything. But at the same time, as you said, if people are going to be burning out, then you know, all of that resilience and warm glow and all that goodwill, it's kind of challenging, that, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I mean, there is that risk of burnout, but I think people are finding different ways to work and are bouncing back. But the other thing for me, in terms of, you know, you saying how you see it locally, because I work a bit across Europe, it's fascinating seeing Scotland through other people's eyes. And, you know, we're seen to some extent as a world leader in terms of having a social enterprise strategy, having inclusive economic growth, having a national performance framework that links to sustainable development goals. So in Scotland, we don't see that, but when you go out and then you see people looking back in, you think, oh, actually, we're doing okay. So actually that for me, you know, is a really fascinating lens to see things through.
I think you're right. I get that a lot on Twitter. So people, like, you know, they respond to Scottish Government's national outcomes account and the stuff that Paul's doing with the SDG network and stuff. And they say that you guys are actually pioneering this stuff, you know? You know, you should be telling us how to do this kind of thing. It doesn't feel like that when you hear them, because you know,
it doesn't here. It's not until you go elsewhere and people are desperate for us to come and talk about it. So yeah, I'm off to Russia next week.
All right.
Wow.
That's not.
I think there's an opportunity if we're what we're on trends. Okay. I'm aware, and I don't know if it's just because I'm becoming aware of it or if it's a trend of more and more of the commercial people who work in the commercial or corporate world wanting to get involved and do something. So I think there's a huge opportunity to have more partnerships between volunteers of all ilks and get them pulled in to help and take away some of this, take away de-risk the burnout by being able to bring in external skills.
Yeah, but there's something about busting the myths. We've got 20 strategic partners that we work with from the corporate world, but we also have a leadership exchange program that we match people across different sectors so they can learn from each other's, learn about each other's worlds. And I think there's still an awful lot of myths out there around, what the sector's like and how professional it is and how there's learning both ways, not just from other sectors into the third sector. And I think equally that goes governance-wise. We're very good at getting public and private sector people onto third sector boards, but we're not so good at getting third sector people into private and public boards. So I think that understanding could be helpful. And I think the other thing we've still not got quite right is how we best use the wrong word, utilise people who do want to work with the sector, because it's got an awful lot better than, the corporate world having a day out and painting the walls of the community centre. But quite often finance people don't want to come into the third sector and do finance. They want to do something else. They want to work with kids. They want to, work in the garden, because they don't want to do their day job. So I think we need to find a better way of working out how to do that skills transfer and make more of the understanding about it being two ways. Both directions.
Also, I've been noticing all this, the trends that we're seeing in things like B Corps, and, responsible, sustainable businesses. And, like yourself, I've been picking up some really strong vibes from particularly larger corporates, that a lot of the kind of new talent that they're recruiting, the most senior type execs, young folk that are going in there saying, I want to make a career here. They're actually, saying, look, I can work for your company, or I could work for this big company. Both are offering, sizable salaries. But what are you doing for the planet? And, because that's actually quite an important thing. And that kind of question apparently has been picked up a lot more. And so a lot of corporates, I think, we need to get our head around.
Those millennials, isn't it?
But it's the other side of it as well. I think as a consumer, people expect corporates to, be shown a way that they are giving something back.
And we're seeing like the ethical index and stuff, with share indexes. They're all on the rise now. As people are looking to invest not just for like maximizing their financial return, but they also want to get a social return. And that's actually a pretty positive, hopeful development.
No, definitely.
Do you want to say something, Janine?
She's been saying about.
Oh, you're writing now.
About more than money. Totally agree. They say that it's over 80% of young people coming out of universities, when you ask them what they want to do with their life, they say they want to make a difference in the world, above what the career they want is.
But do you think maybe we've got this wrong around? Because we're thinking that if you want to make a difference in the world, you have to work for the third sector. Whereas actually, maybe people can embody the kind of way in which maybe some of our sector thinks, but also do that through the private sector or the public sector.
You can. The last company that I just left, they had a huge corporate social responsibility program, and they have measured their carbon footprint and target to reduce it. And do quite a lot. Good things.
I suppose is that an advantage or a disadvantage? Because to some extent, does that mean that the boundaries are blurring between the different sectors?
And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Exactly. Because to some extent, if we're all trying to make the world or Scotland a better place, doesn't matter how we do it. But on the other hand, does it mean we're all going to be scrabbling to do particular pieces of work or playing to our strengths? Or so it's maybe a different way of thinking.
I think it's still worth keeping that separation. Because I think, like, if I, as somebody who wants to put money into all this stuff, if I put it into big business, knowing that it's going to go into profits somewhere, then I want to make sure that, my investment has got a return financially as well as social. Whereas if I put my money into a charity, then I'm not really expecting a financial return, just a social return. And so having a really strong charity brand
I think for me is really important, and having that. So I wouldn't be very comfortable with the idea that you had corporates that were indistinguishable from, even if they're doing great things. I mean, personally, my view is that all organizations should be a social and environmental enterprise, or social or environmental enterprise. Every organization, whatever size, whichever sector. It's just so that there is a set within that, which is charities, where you might give money and that it's all going to go into be invested in there. It's not going to be taken out for profit or shares.
And so the bit for me, which is the exciting part, because as I've started to learn more about it, it's actually the social enterprises. If we can, because to me they're the midpoint between charities, which are just going, I need funding and I'll spend it well and do good stuff, and commercial, which is going, I want to make money. And social enterprises are going, that's my understanding so far, is we want to make enough money to continue to do the good stuff that we do. So we're not looking for funders once we get started, really. We want to just keep going and be self-sustaining. So to me, the opportunity is to really develop that in-between segment.
I think for me, there's another in-between segment though, because for me, it's all a spectrum. And if you think of organisations that are often seen as very traditional charities, Bernardo's been an example. They get a lot of their income from trading because it's contracts with local authorities, and they have charity shops. So they sort of are. A lot of them, there's a crossover, so there isn't social enterprise or charity. They're all intertwined in a way. So for me, it's something about, no matter where you sit on that spectrum, how can you be enterprising? To fit with the sustainability piece.
So, is that a barrier then, that, there's a blurring going on, or is that an opportunity?
I see it as an opportunity, but I think there's something about, and I think what SCBO did with their What is a Modern Charity piece, I think there's something about raising awareness and understanding to the public about what the third sector is these days, because I think there's still a lot of myths out there about what we are and what we do. I think the other one for me, in terms of a trend, and you could again see it as a positive or negative, is succession planning, in the way that of our 500 members, we're hearing about 50% are planning to leave or retire within the next 5 years.
All right.
So there's an age demographic. And not leave the sector is wrong, because most of them are going on portfolio careers and doing, public appointments, being on boards, doing consultancy work. But the sector doesn't have a pipeline of new leaders coming through in the way that other sectors do. There's no set degree, there's no graduate entry route. There's, it tends to be a much more sort of pinball type entry into the sector. So I think we've been finding there's a bit of a worry about the future leaders in the sector, and there needs to be a wee bit focus put on that.
Janine's talking about the ethics. As long as there's a strong ethical base, then we can bring charity and associated causes to the public sphere. I'm not quite sure I understand that second bit, Janine. But the ethical approach is one of our strengths, isn't it? And it seems to be spreading to other sectors. And there's an opportunity there for third sector organisations to collaborate more with corporates. To support that development, because they're looking for that kind of
they're
support.
very keen. But I think there's something there about the public sector, and how they become more enterprising.
Yes.
Even if it's in ways of thinking and ways of acting and ways of delivering.
But what does enterprising mean? Does it mean that we kind of like try and get more self-generated income, or does it mean that we more efficient and business-like? What is it?
I think it's not even just more efficient and business-like. It's more, for me, there's a bit about client-centered as well. How do you get the ideas from the front line? I'm thinking of things like what the Edge are doing in terms of getting people that are working on the front line with the client group to come up with the ideas of how things could be done differently. More lean, So it's using, because to some extent people would see that as a business ethos of finding what the customer wants.
Yeah.
Whereas if there's, I think all sectors should be doing that to become more efficient. It's not about making more money in the public sector. I think they could be much more efficient by just thinking about what systems that work better and not being stuck in the way they've always done things. And it's that enterprise and new ideas type is what I'm meaning.
So that whole the bit from the beginning about squeezing to do more with less and being as efficient as we can, I'm thinking. Probably not really, but I think maybe you're yes, there will be some opportunities
to some
think
then I see
client value, customer
value. And to some extent I see more need for that in the public. In the private sector, and third, because I might be, I know they're.
No, my husband's a local councillor.
And I know there's a load of difficulties and a load of squash, but I know from a user of services, I see things all the time that you're thinking, why did it have to be that way? That's just such a waste and so ridiculous. And
well, we don't have any dedicated paths into the sector, do we? People just stumble in and suddenly find themselves they're working in the sector. I mean, Ginny's saying that we should offer more internships and volunteer roles to recent school leavers.
Definitely.
Graduates.
And even one of my bugbears is we're very good at getting business leaders into schools when they're doing that, like founders for schools.
Yeah.
I mean, how many kids would say at primary school, I want to work with charities when I grow up.
Yeah.
You know what though? I think we've got that the wrong way around. Because I was thinking just a few weeks ago, we had all those kids that went out campaigning on climate change.
Yeah.
And they weren't thinking, right, I want to work out, set up a charity on this.
Yeah.
They were thinking, I want to tackle climate change. And then off the back of that comes all the stuff about charities and things like that.
But a lot of kids don't even understand that there is a career possibility in the sector at that stage. They don't, they don't see it as a career path, I think. They do want to get engaged and make a difference and do things, but they see that as being an activist rather than.
Do we have that anymore though? Do people see career paths anymore? I mean, they used to have like a fast track career service.
Yeah.
Had all the kind of like internships and routes into business. We had the kind of apprenticeships approach in trades. All these different things. But do people really see things that way anymore? Do young folk actually think in terms of, right, I want to belong to this tradition for the rest of my life type thing, or do they think differently?
I think they think differently. I've got a 23-year-old, and I think they do think differently in that there isn't a job for life anymore. They bounce about doing different things, but they still want to train in something. You still get folk wanting to be doctors or lawyers or civil servants or, retailers, whatever. So I think they still have an idea about this as a field I want to work in, but then they might bounce around. But I don't think many of them will think, I want to be in.
Is there an opportunity? I think it's something you said earlier. Maybe it was Janine. Is there an opportunity to have a university degree focused on building skills that are useful and in the third sector or even public sector?
Or even elements of, so that it is more recognised. Sorry, I'm just going to read this.
Oh, sorry.
Social science degree.
No, again, shouldn't have to be that way.
That's what you meant.
Yeah, and I'm trying to break in now, and you break feels like I don't break in. I feel just moving. Something Janine said further up was really hard to get in at a higher level, and I'm thinking, okay, you just give up. I'm not ready to give up yet, but that's good.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is, but.
So what are the barriers? Because we're supposed to, or are you going to call out when to move to step 2, or should we be?
I thought we already started on step 2.
We're starting to. That's okay.
We've talked
So
about
the
some
biggest barriers. What's the barrier on having succession planning? Is it that organisations tend to have one leader and there aren't, there's a very top heavy and then the rest, or what? Aren't we grooming?
I think because of the nature of the sector, we don't, most organisations are not big enough that you can have a next layer of leadership who are ready to step up. So quite often it does have to come out with and as as a leader of an organisation, I mean, it's becoming a wee bit more flexible, but you know, you want your organisation to be seen as very sort of grounded and settled, and so you wouldn't normally say 2 years in advance, so I might be going to move on, you know. But I know in a risk register, a lot of folk, the biggest risk is too much dependence on one key person in the organisation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what Janine's saying is we need to be more visible to graduates.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that's what I was saying about people don't understand the career possibilities in the sector.
Yeah.
There's still a whole world out there that sort of says, so do you actually get paid for doing that?
But do you think maybe we focus too much on the sector and maybe less on the kinds of jobs that we do in the sector? So for example, you know, you could say, look, do you want to be involved in advocating for people at the same time as supporting them? Do you want to be involved in, like, you know, creating those spaces where communities thrive? Do you want to be involved in, you know, so it's more about what we do rather than what we are.
Yeah.
Is there a way of communicating that? Because I wonder whether that might capture their imagination more.
Well, I had a similar conversation on the back of Trustee Week when we were talking about getting more young people to be trustees. And the challenge we got from the young people was, if you say, do you want to be on a board of this charity? They're like, no. But if you say, do you want to make a difference in your local community for children from disadvantaged areas, then it's a yes. So it's how we put it over. So I think there is something about that. Yeah, the pay.
You have to volunteer,
I mean, I think that's a challenge as well, though, because in our sector, the pay isn't as good as other sectors.
But can I just correct that from a stats perspective, right? Because I've researched this. Maybe a while ago, it's changed. But basically, what our sector is compared to the others is we're much more squished. So the gap between the highest salaries and the lowest salaries is a lot narrower. It's a lot slower range.
I'm speaking from a chief exec perspective.
Yeah, but in the private sector, it's massive. So massively paid people, very low paid people.
Yeah.
So the average ends up being like that. You know, on average, public sector is paid the best. Then voluntary sector is paid second best. Then private sector is paid worst. And that's not because you don't have insanely high salaries in the private sector, because you have insanely low salaries as well.
So the mode average, and if you took median, it'd be a different story.
I think so. And I think spread as well. So, you know, it's important to look at the spread here, not just where it's in the middle or the average, because I think the spread is very, very wide in private sector. In the voluntary sector, it's the narrowest. Maybe that speaks to some of the values in our sector.
I think it does speak to the values, but I think there is something about people at different stages in life when they've got other concerns that they maybe would love to come and work in the sector, but actually can't afford to. You know, I think the average chief exec salary is something like 42K, of which there's been, I think that was the last Kivo survey. But again, there's, you know, that's the middle bit, but compared to other sectors, that's pretty low and wouldn't attract an awful lot of people in unless they could afford to do that.
But do you think maybe part of it is because, like, in the past, a lot of jobs that used to be would have been called like director or coordinator or whatever has been turned into chief executive in order to kind of like be more visible to other sectors?
I think there's a bit of that, but I think there's still, that's why we're called the Association of Chief Officers, because it's all different job titles, because there's a lot of people that are still called lots of other things, but they are the most senior person in their organisation. But yeah, people don't understand. But I think that's the challenge, that because of public perceptions about all the money should go to the front line, the minute there's anything about, you know, trying to show that you can get a good salary to encourage people to come into the sector, then has the public pushback of, I don't want my money going into a big salary.
That's actually come up quite strongly in some of the forums for like civil society, where people are kind of saying, look, you know, what's the name again? A person that's the True and Fair Foundation. Gina Miller. So she's criticized the sector, saying, look, you know, you guys, you know, you're far too much money is going into the you know, back office and stuff like that, when it should be going to the front line. But I think maybe there's a little bit of a misunderstanding there, because I think I would argue that people don't really understand what the front line is. and they think it's some magical bit where it's all volunteers doing things for free.
Yeah,
And I
unless
think
someone
maybe
coordinates it.
maybe
So
there's a bit
the
of an
coordination of
education
the volunteers is almost frontline as well, because one wouldn't happen without,
Yeah.
without the other.
I think so. So if you told me, if you said splitting out how this charity spends its money, that is all about the organisation and the funding, then the part that I would be wanting to say, well, are you spending too much on X instead? The X instead would be like publicity, or it wouldn't be paying the organisation, because it has to exist to make deliver the services.
Yeah, there was a good analogy, and I'll probably get the wrong way around, but it was almost saying, you know, in the public sector, you wouldn't say we'll pay for the teachers, but not the school building.
Yeah.
Or
Or
books.
headmasters. But you're right, and it is actually the same, because I think headmasters are getting paid what, and that's not right, because that's like too much. Why should? But the headmasters running an organisation of maybe 1,800 people, really.
But also, I think maybe our sector is sometimes a bit too apologetic.
Yeah.
And we kind of try and say, oh, but you know, we're reducing the amount of money we spend on overheads. Look, that'll be brilliant. So you're thinking, but that's just not going to make you less efficient. You know, someone else is going to have to pick up the tab, and things are going to crash.
Yeah, and there's some interesting studies coming out of the States where they've shown that if, I can't remember the figures, but it's something like if your overheads are over 30%, then actually you're X amount more efficient than if they're under.
Right.
I can't remember what the percentage is, but there is some study coming out of the States, which is real evidence that shows that, you know, if you try and get your overheads down to 10%, you're actually not going to be delivering good enough service. I suppose we've been focusing maybe on the more specific tactical things rather than the bigger picture world. We didn't really take notes on a few minutes, so you're in your head. Sure.
It's all recorded on YouTube.
So
there you go.
Oh dear,
Our group is on YouTube.
No, he tells us.
Well, I told you at the beginning.
Easy to forget.
Yeah, that's fine. We should be able to have more frank conversations about this. I think that's part of the problem as well, isn't it? Because out there, when we speak publicly, we're very careful about the impression we think people have of our sector. So we look as though we're apologising. Because maybe we just need to kind of tell people how it is in our sector.
Yeah.
And that we, maybe in our own sector, we're also trying to think, we're not quite clear yet ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah.
So that creates confusion when we're trying to communicate it.
Yeah. Have we gone back?
Yeah.
I think it's time to
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
And thanks, Janine.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Janine.
Is this yours?
It was just sitting here.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Till it goes to another meeting too.
Yes, I realised that the third sector runs on cards, and I need to get something.
Yeah, so it's always less so as long as you're connected email-wise or Twitter-wise. I have my contacts with Twitter these days.
That's not a request. But you're still in Edinburgh. Still in Edinburgh.
So how is finding
York
6 weeks in?
It's been a wild thrill ride. Yeah, non-stop. No, it's good. It's lots of very nice people, which you might expect. It's just so broad. That's what keeps coming to planet. Like the size of so many different organisations and how they fit together. There's lots of our so in the sports sector most of our members aren't technical charities, but lots of stuff that's sort of the for charitable organisations, not technically, but they fit under those frameworks. A lot of the policy stuff that affects charities affects that as well. But yeah, no, it's
I generally
Have you worked in the sector?
I used to work charity. Did you say you lived in London?
Yes.
English version of that.
I resisted giving me
Changed their lives. Honestly, because I went to university and I did stuff around that.
I'm feeling pressure to get
Yeah, well, I can't do anything about it. It's had a lot less. But yes, I'm interested in absolutely slightly further back, which brings some challenges.
Yeah.
I'm just
because someone said,
it's sort of very tick box, and it's kind of
I went round there, I handed a child violin.
problem solved. It was more, I referred that child to social services, but
right, yeah.
Nobody ever asked me to do a violin.
As well as
But yeah, there's a lot of this. Just okay, and what we're doing about that, what's the kind of action point at the end?
Right, yeah.
So I'm not as good
Which I think is maybe quite a big
but I'm finding
or a man that's disappointed.
if I'm emailing my kids.
Fingers crossed on that one.
I have to send them a message to tell them that.
That's the attitude. What's this?
Big thumbs up. Well, I have worked for charity for the last 6 months, so what's the development worker?
Yeah. Because even our stuff is very
yes, and I think I just got to write lessons, big lessons on the wall, and sort of not lose them.
So she's actually got the sector that's been because it's really around the lectures.
Okay. So before we go into our next sort of group session, which is going to be on future visions and what we would like to see, where we'd like the sector to be in 2030. I think it's probably useful if we talk a bit about what all of the groups discussed. Just so you know, when we're thinking about the future, we can think about a broader range of themes, maybe than we just had a chance to discuss ourselves. So we are running a bit behind time, so I'll go first and I'll keep it brief. So we talked a bit about how the sector is also often accused of being behind in terms of digital technology, but there was a feeling that there's a lot of opportunities at the moment for the sector to take advantage of funding, to upskill their digital capacities. So we thought that was an important trend. Trend-wise, we felt really worried about social change, and we felt worried that the gap between rich and poor is going to continue to grow and what the sector can do about that. And we felt concerned that the sector goes into silos, and when we are applying for funding, for example, maybe think about food poverty, period poverty, different things rather than just poverty. Also, we felt worried about the skills for the future in terms of educating young people. So school level. I think there was a feeling that the curriculum for excellence is doing well, but that it's only just the start of that process, and that high schools were further behind primary schools, so weren't doing as well. We also discussed if the sector was held back by boards, and if there's a need for board members to, attract more young people, keep their skills up to date, and think a bit more outside the box. And in terms of barriers, we thought maybe one of the barriers to change was people in the sector. So resistance to change, like not everybody wants to change, and maybe a lack of reliance on data, where people instead use anecdotal evidence. And we wondered if maybe there was a nervousness around when people do a project, that they've had funding for, and it doesn't go well. There's like a nervousness about reporting when something fails, and how can we learn from ideas, that don't work, as well as ideas that do work. And if something doesn't work, maybe we don't need to think, oh, we could push on that again and do better, but maybe we just need to think differently and think, that wasn't actually the best plan. Yeah, so I think that's us. So I'll move on. Who wants to go first?
Okay, right, so we talked about a risk was that we don't have succession planning for senior leaders in the organisation, and that was coupled with the potential for burnout, and also the age profile was that potentially there's a large number of those leaders going to be leaving in the next 5 years. On a positive side, the sector is always optimistic and is working towards solving problems and believes in itself, and that externally Europe and the rest of the world think Scotland is are great leaders in this sector and want to learn from us, and maybe we should stop and reflect on how good we are and the things that we're doing well. We think there's an opportunity to share across the private and the third sectors, and to make that a two-way sharing so that both can learn from each other. There's a trend that generally consumers are looking for a better return on their investment in the third sector now, and better return for their money generally. So they're looking for ethics and morals everywhere. Sorry, at the beginning of a better return from the third sector, that's wrong. Better return from the private sector by connecting more to the third sector. That's what I was trying to say. We had a discussion dear to my lean heart about how the third sector can be more enterprising, which is more focused on more customer value and how to improve and make more efficient processes towards delivering more value, and being more customer centered. An opportunity to, this comes a little bit back to succession planning, but an opportunity to share potential career paths in the voluntary sector, in the third sector, with organisations, with universities, with school children, so that people think of that as a career. And then even to the, how do we have universities developing a course which would support and educate, give people the skills to then come and work in the third sector. I think that's all that I actually jotted down.
Obviously, big overlap with what you've already said. So we sort of started off with the demographics, because that dominates. Obviously, the aging population, so pros and cons of that, because you might have quite healthy, vigorous older people, but mainly it sort of gets dominated by the care aspect. And then the implications of Brexit are very closely linked to that. If you do need to increase the care for people, but even just an aging population in terms of increased pensions and tax, and the wealth inequality that we're seeing as well. So there's a divide happening between younger and older people there, a bit of resentment. so that sort of feeds into one of the things that we've highlighted the Junior Role of Philanthropy. We could chat about that because obviously philanthropy has been dominated by sort of single wealthy individuals, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen in the future. Are we going to go back to that sort of divide, or what's happening just now is it seems to be more a smaller scale, people with pockets of wealth aren't massive, but they have money to be philanthropic with. So less about single donor, more about sort of shared philanthropic idea. Health inequalities linked to deprivation. We also wondered about rural areas, what's happening there, whether that was going to become more polarised. We have chat about market failure, and again, sort of enterprise idea. So the sector is able to fill gaps and meet needs, but also the whole aspect of being more ethical, the angle. In terms of barriers, there was also linked to the tackling market failures that we sometimes lack the space for funding to think creatively and try things out. There's also increasing accountability and bureaucracy being placed on the sector. So although there might be innovative funding, things like sort of partnerships and sort of the way that we're funded is that the government's devolving some of the responsibility to the sector. So although we've maybe got more say, we've also got far more bureaucracy, responsibility and accountability. Conversation did get dominated a bit by funding, as it would, but not just funding, so maybe how local authority funds, some of the political barriers as well. So sometimes we might have good ideas and sometimes even the councillor support, but sometimes it then breaks down when it hits officer level because the council has, although there's progressive ideas over here, then there's less progressive ideas, and they don't always harmoniously move forward. So there are barriers that could be overcome. Anything else that missed out? Things like participatory budgeting, that's a good idea, but sometimes it breaks down in reality because popularity contests. So although the ideas are great, it's there's sometimes barriers to being as effective. Do you think community plans came out as well? The role of community planning.
Okay, so I think if we go back into our groups, we imagine what we'd like to see in 2030 and what positive action we can take to get there. I think if we just do that for 20 minutes and then we can come back and talk about it, and then we can talk about how can SCBO help us get there, what sort of things should we focus on when we're thinking about the future based on all the themes that come. Okay?
Same groups.
Yeah.
So it's very important.
Speak at the end.
Sorry.
Microphone. Okay. Yeah, that's all fine. Okay. I'm not sure if Janine's still with us. Janine, if you're there, can you just send a quick thing of quick text to us? Oops. I need to turn the
she's here.
camera around.
Hi.
I knew something was missing.
Just
Half my head is on trying to make sure this thing works, Back to that. Turn around. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Yeah, that's it. Do you want me to take notes this time?
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. So,
Can I borrow a pen?
There's a pen.
right in the back of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 2030.
My first thing that came into my head is that every single person in Scotland is doing something in their daily life that makes the community better and contributes to the community.
Yeah.
So everyone has found a way to give to the community somehow.
And it'd probably be quite surprising about how close we are to that already in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Spoken to a couple of groups Well, back in St Andrews,
It's just hard to compare them.
I was asked to give an input in the sector, but when I asked, you know, so who's involved in the sector, nobody really said anything. But then when I said, you know, have any of you been involved in the Scouts or the Guides or, you know, volunteering in your community or blah, 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 everyone around the table did have some connection, but they didn't recognise it.
As such. Which is something a bit towards what Janine said earlier about making things visible.
Yeah.
Maybe
the sector
maybe
is
there's an
better
opportunity
understood.
for the sector to, yes, so it's what does that, what is the sector? It's not fluffy stuff over there, it's actually doing all these things, you're part of it.
Yeah.
So is that an opportunity for the SCVO to think about promoting the big picture of the sector in Scotland?
Yeah.
That's
SCV's role, right?
SCV, and that's one of the things we'll get to eventually.
That's the end section.
Yeah.
The end section. Okay,
Could you
will
put
I
that
take
on
that down?
flip,
SCVO role. Okay. So it's promoting.
Suppose it's 5 minutes on each step. We've got step one,
Yeah,
imagine it's
step one.
2030.
Okay, so what else?
2030.
What else is in 2030?
Is there something around, I think I put something up there about reducing demand because we've been focusing on prevention or being successful, you know, that whole thing about some organisations should be set up to do themselves out of business, because if you meet the need and the demand, or if you reduce the need by being preventative.
I love that. When I'm supporting charities, I tend towards ones where I think they're getting into the root cause analysis sort of steps, stages or something. You could imagine that it might go away.
But that in some ways that's the most difficult bit to address, because you're more likely to get funding to address the need that's already there than to be able to work in a preventative way to stop the need occurring.
Yeah. So maybe we're in 2030 we'll come back and thinking, because of those steps we took back in 2020. We're now in 2030.
You know,
seeing
we've halved whether it's suicide rates or you know, a health condition.
Those brave decisions we made back 10 years ago.
Yeah. So there's maybe something around funders have more of a focus on prevention.
Yes, funders have had more of a focus on prevention, and also I think policy partnerships on policy too have been working towards understanding how policy changes are needed as part of the prevention story.
Yeah, sorry, there's something.
Janine, I think it's important to also showcase how linked in we are to other areas. Yes, like the NHS, public health, justice. Yep, absolutely. So
it's almost having a cross-sectoral impact. You know, if you link that back to what you were saying before.
Yeah.
That is also one, I think, Janine, for this SCVO role, for showcasing the links.
And almost it's ways to build bridges and enable the links. You know, we found with the leadership exchange program how once you get two people understanding each other's worlds better, they become a conduit between them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's 2030.
It's 2030. So
people are saying, well, what did we do in the SDGs? It's meant to be delivered this year. And Scotland has a strong, proud story to tell about what it did to take us forward towards the sustainable development goals.
Maybe something about shouting about that, but not waiting until 2030. But
so
sooner to encourage more work globally.
Can you describe it? Yes. So we have attained our sustainable, our 2030 goals.
Or we have made a strong contribution because it's a global problem, isn't it?
Okay, but maybe to your European point earlier, or Russia or wherever, maybe one of the things we want to say in 2030 is the world comes to Scotland to find out how to do civil society. I don't know what the generic term
Oh,
for.
there's more opportunities to learn from each other globally.
Yeah. But what does it look like then? How did you describe it? Okay.
So they come to Scotland, they want to share and learn.
Yeah, and Scotland is going to the world to make it your other thing. And Scotland is finding the best, has found best practices in, like, to try and project what it feels like then.
Yeah, despite Brexit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're all trying not to go there.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, okay. So everybody's involved, we're great at it, and we're hitting goals. I think in a nutshell is what that's coming down to, isn't it? Which is very.
So what do we actually need to do then? What positive action do we need to make?
What would a positive action be?
What would a positive action to make this real look like?
There is something for me about the people that work in the sector, how they're supported and developed as leaders to be able to take that work forward.
Yeah. I think it's a risk. When we're talking about an organisation that's set up to put itself out of business, that's a really hard thing to be, because everybody has that's my job and I feed my kids, and
some needs will never be fully addressed.
No. I mean, the Alzheimer's Society's vision is there is none. And it's just a fabulous vision because it's so simple and straightforward. And when there is none, then they'll just be able to walk away. Like potentially there was a polio, although it's starting to come back, isn't it? What's that? Polio. There must have been lots of polio support societies once that have all disappeared.
So can I just ask about this thing? Because, you know, I hear it a lot about the ambition of the third sector should be to put itself out of business. Presumably that's because we feel that, you know, we're kind of providing lots of services, which hopefully once it's prevented will not be needed anymore. But
I don't think it's a whole, the sector puts itself out of business. I think if we address particular needs, there'll be other needs popping up all the time. So it's being able to be more flexible and adaptable to what the needs are.
Yeah, and that solves that other out of job problem. It's fine because there's then stuff to happen over here. So the sector has found a way to,
you know, it's a success to close something down and start something else up. It's not saying it's a failure.
Yeah.
So we could become more. Is there scope for us to become? I think there is actually more flexible and adaptable, isn't there? There is scope for us to do
innovative. No, I don't like using that word actually, because we keep being told you have to be innovative to get money, so we reinvent them, which is not what I mean.
Enterprising.
Enterprising, maybe with my previous definition of enterprising.
Yeah.
But yeah, you try something, you either deal with it or it doesn't work, you then do something else.
Agile?
That's got connotations too, if it's in its pure form of the word.
Pure agility.
I like it. Actually, one of the words that's used in the sector a wee bit that I actually quite like is bounceability.
Bounceability? Interesting.
You know that thing you hit rock bottom and you pick yourself up and you
that's like resilience. That's resilience, really, isn't it?
But
which is not.
But there's a resilience that keeps you there.
Yeah.
And there's a bounceability about every time you go down that hole, you get back out again.
It's hard in my head to go past just continuous improvement.
Yeah.
You just want to be continuously looking at how to improve. And
but I've heard some arguments for the other side of that, because if it's continuous improvement that you're focusing on, when do you ever celebrate success?
Oh no, you do that all the time. You celebrate success because you have have an end goal, but you have to have lots of little steps on the way that you celebrate success or learn about failure. Because whoever made the failure point, that was a great point. We're not. Many organisations are not good at learning from failure.
Yeah. I think that's getting better though. I've spoken to quite a few funders that now say that they're much more open to you explaining why something doesn't work and why you have to do it differently. Much rather that than you pretend you haven't failed. So I've seen quite a shift in that.
Yeah.
Cool. So what would a positive action? We're supposed to be doing positive actions.
So I've got two here. Supporting people in the sector as leaders. And the other one was this whole kind of flexible bounceability stuff, which I think I love
So
that
how's
word,
that an
actually.
action?
Positive action, so we become more
No,
flexible.
you can.
bounceable.
It's not an action. Really,
That's an achievement.
that's a.
So how do we become more flexible and adaptable?
We explore more ways of
Yeah, I mean,
working.
that's still fluffy, but it's better. Yes, explore ways to
Explore
become more
ways
flexible to those skills and support people in the sector as leaders. Can we develop or something rather than support to something a bit stronger? Oh, okay. Sorry, Janine, we're just reading.
You need to read it out to me. Michaela, can't
Right.
read
I
from
think we address issues where there is a real need. So, for example, the sector stepped up with food banks, but there was an argument that this caused the government to step back. But what are you supposed to do? It's people's lives. Using the government to do something doesn't always work and can leave people vulnerable. Yes, we need to speak about failure and not be afraid to share our failures so we can learn from them collectively. Okay, so there's a failure point, and the first point, we need to address issues where there is a real need.
It's always filling the gap.
So that's prioritizing. So it's saying that we need good processes for prioritizing the most important things.
But she's also saying that what else could we have done in these people's lives? So it sounds like we need,
The food bank example, I suppose, is it how much is it about campaigning for change and how much is it about addressing the need and how do you get that balance?
Yeah. Which is, that's coming back to the very beginning thing, isn't it? It's that root cause, fixing the root causes. So I don't know what the action is, but we want to have the outcome we want is the right balance between immediate corrective action and root cause.
Addressing
root causes. I'm not sure what that means for you.
I don't know. I'm just trying to see where it goes. Addressing root causes.
So I suppose it's about getting the balance between the campaigning, the sustainable work, and the sort of crisis action. It's getting the balance between all of those.
So
which means persuading. So there's an action. So the action then is to work with funders to get the funding to cover the balance and not just sticking plasters. We don't want sticking plasters. We want.
I'll just write this down.
I think it's as well. It's not forgetting the campaigning side of the sector. Because if you want change to happen, there's that side as well.
Campaigning.
And those are you can see why that feels harder to people, because if someone's giving money, they want to put food in someone's mouth or save a child. They don't want to pay for posters.
But that's the only way we might then ultimately get help. But there's still something there around the cross-sectoral understanding. There's a project going on just now, I think it's called Scott Gem, around training up GPs from different backgrounds, but as part of the training, having placements in third sector organisations, so they have a much more holistic model of prescribing.
Yes.
So that's a sort of example of how the sectors are working together. So it might be that joining a walking group would address somebody's loneliness and depression and some of the health issues and be a bit preventative.
Yeah, somebody used the term green prescription recently, which I haven't heard. So it's actually prescribing that you join a walking group. Yeah,
so there's that sort of how do across sectors, how do we try and address the issues rather than
what would
just
it
doing
cause that action?
Social prescribing training. Prescribing training for GPs.
I mean that's probably a more specific thing, but more generally it's how do we work across sectors so that there's a
so maybe the action is that everyone has to think of one. If each one of us could come up with just one way of building a partnership that would help that collaboration between the private and the third sector. What's a GP? Not really. public sector. Private public.
A partnership between
Partnerships
whom?
between the third sectors and the public and the private. All combinations.
Cross-sectoral partnerships. How we add value by working better together.
Yes.
No, because at the end of the day.
What role do you see for yourself, your organisation, group, or community in this future vision?
I suppose my organisation, probably not me in 10 years' time, would be continuing to support leaders in the sector, but we now work on a leadership life cycle. So we support those going into the leadership role and also those coming out of the role. I think there's a bit there we've maybe missed somewhere as well. Like we've now got a growing alumni network that our chief execs have moved on from their full-time role. But you know, as well as the worry of the ageing population, there's also ageing well. So there's a lot of people leaving their full-time role, but still going on to boards, going to public appointments, doing consultancy work. We don't want to lose their knowledge and expertise to the sector. They don't want to lose their networks. So how do we harness that energy as well? Just slightly off the, but so for our role, I think the focus is on, it's not just on the current leaders, it's the future leaders and the leaders that are moving on to the next stage of their lives.
Okay. This question is more for individuals, not rather than a group discussion.
Yeah.
The step
This is
3,
what might
yes, is
be-
your new organisation.
But
Oh, sorry, I'm looking
it's
at
still
the
helpful
one.
to share it, but I'm just thinking in terms of
Yeah.
future.
Yourself, your organisation, your group or community.
Yeah.
I didn't know you.
What do
role
you see? You,
For me?
for you or for the rest of you or?
Well, I'm beginning to think maybe a little bit differently about this now. I'm thinking, look, you know, am I really a third sector person? I'm not so sure anymore. I'm thinking like, yeah, in my day job, I come into the office and you know, I talk about myself as being third sector. But then, you know, I also participate in politics. I participate in private enterprise. You know, I might be volunteering in the evening. And I'm kind of thinking, well, actually, you know, rather than belonging to a particular sector, maybe we're all just human beings.
And maybe it's about bringing your whole self to work, because I've argued that, because I've sat around tables and people have argued, why don't we get someone with lived experience? And I'm like, well, we all have lived experience.
Yes.
We're all citizens. We've all, you know, have services that we access. So, but
We've all gone
we're
through
not
crisis
just
and
sitting
stuff.
here with our professional hats on.
And at some point in our life, you know, we might be a carer for a relative. We might be a parent. We might be an activist going out there on the streets and marching. We might be just passively learning, soaking stuff
Plus,
in.
I've done all of that.
Yeah.
So, but so maybe there's something about what could we do? We could bring our whole self to work.
Yeah, yeah, I like that actually. We're in.
And be able to switch in and out of the different hats.
Yeah, because then it becomes less about communicating across sectors. So I'm just keeping an eye on the text. And it then becomes more about, well, okay, look, you know, collectively as citizens, what do we do through charities? What do we do through government? What do we do through this? So it's not like us and them.
Yeah.
This is all the different channels we collectively have to seek change.
And we can see through all those different lenses.
Yeah. And it somehow that feels more wholesome and less divisive.
Yeah.
It's a good experiment to do.
Do we need to do the reflections, tensions, fractures, themes, contradictions?
She's gone past the 20 minutes.
I hope we can work to showcase the link of getting into green space and take part in the community with this. Yeah.
It always feels like quite a bad thing to be very told.
I thought you were going to say trainers.
Yeah.
No, just pure positive ScotRail miles.
Okay, so we're back in.
Up.
Thanks very much.
Might start to
Sneakily sneak. Sneakily sneak. Run that in. Thank you for that.
I had written, just in case you were looking for. Yeah, no, I hadn't written anything. There's a lot.
The facilitators can share all the things, later. So maybe just a couple of key things, and then we'll move on to, to achieve these things or the wider things in discussion. What could we do, as individuals or within our organisations, or what could SVO do? So within our group, the main thing we discussed was creating a kinder Scotland, and we talked about stuff we do both within work, but I think there was a feeling that we need to live the brand and do more to be kinder in general. So, not just the focus of our work or our organisations, but if we actually want to create a kinder Scotland, we all need to be kinder in general and do more to be kinder. And as part of that, we talked quite a bit about the duty of care to individuals working within the sector, and how can we, look after people, within our organisations, not just the people that we work with, but also actually just the people around us that we're working with. We also talked a bit about the need to engage more with the private sector. We also said that maybe work doesn't happen in meetings, and we need to have less meetings, and maybe a 1 hour rule to help us be more productive.
The workshops are okay. 2 hour workshops.
Yeah, everyone agreed that that was perfect length of time.
So we actually had a sort of interesting discussion starting off with young people in particular. So, especially about the pressure on young people and the fact that, and it's something with the fact we're quite market oriented as a society, and it ties into your kind of things. So I was actually thinking one of the work-life balance of young people, and actually also the work-life balance of everyone. So the fact that there's a focus on sort of testing things like that, as opposed to development and skills, and that we as a society and as a sector could do far more around that. So just the vision, it might be things like communities doing things better for themselves, and to do that as a sector, we maybe need to sort of challenge some of the silos that we work in and think more creatively about how we work together and joint work, and also be a bit more ambitious in terms of challenging things that we think are currently not working. Also, things like basic citizens' income, which ties into the space, having the space to be more creative and have flexibility to develop yourself without feeling a lot of the pressure and the anxiety that people currently feel. So you've actually got space to explore and more things. So just trying to fulfill what the type of work that's currently available. It would encourage more entrepreneurialism and help folk to chat, think new ways and do new things. Help in the future. Loads of other stuff here as well, but there was also volunteering came out as well as work. The fact that, well, especially for young people, so I suppose the patterns we see in young people are the trends that we might see in the future, but the fact that a lot of volunteering is very formalised, which I think that the idea was that that's maybe helps with engagement, but actually the flip side of that is negative, that it's becomes far more about getting into a job as opposed to about your own personal development and experience. So for us as a sector to maybe offer much more flexible volunteering opportunities instead of it being very formalised. So it's how do we encourage people to sort of try things. Strong thing about fairness and quality. Apprenticeships as well came up as a big discussion area. Just are they actually working for young people? And there's a big interesting chat about as well online stuff. So there's an idea of online communities are replacing physical communities, but what we're now seeing is that online communities are now becoming meetups. So the divide isn't as great as it used to be, and there's some interesting shifts there. I don't know what that means for us as a sector and our own roles, but it's just something to.
Okay, for our group, which we had Janine as well online. 2030, everyone thinks. Well, everyone thinks, how can I give to the community? But I think we realized that actually people don't recognize how much they already do give to the community, whether it's through scouts, guides, caring, volunteering, all that kind of stuff. And so people kind of like recognize more how much they already are giving and how much they can give. We talked about whether the sector should put itself out of business by 2030, but I think we kind of decided in the end that actually better than that, it's the sector becomes more flexible and adaptable. We talked about the idea of bounceability, so the sector becomes much more able to bounce back and change with the environment around it, and also celebrate its achievements as well. And in order to achieve that, we need to explore ways, we need to kind of look at the balance between the extent to which the sector is a sticking plaster and the extent to which it campaigns on the root causes. One of the examples we used was around food banks, that the sector was obviously having to step in on food banks because it was an emergency and people needed the support. But did that also cause government to step back? So yeah, and the other thing is, we talked a bit about social prescribing with training for GPs, but also green prescribing, the importance of community mental and physical health. In terms of the roles that we see for ourselves, I mean, obviously the specific roles to us and our organizations. But one of the things we thought collectively was how can we bring our whole self to the work that we're trying to do through the sector? We're all citizens, we're all human beings. We don't necessarily belong to sectors. And maybe we need to kind of see how we cut across all of this stuff already, rather than just compartmentalize ourselves too much.
Well, we have not got much time for the last question on, what can we do as a result of this conversation, both, as individuals, organisations, or as SVO. I think most people came along because they want to influence, maybe I'm wrong, SVO's futures work and some of the things that we'll focus on and some of the meetings that we might have, on the back of this, with some experts in the field. So do people, as a result of the conversation we've had today, have ideas around, some of the things they'd like to see SVO do, or themes, or the sorts of workshops, based on the discussions that you feel it would be good to delve deeper into this topic or that topic? That's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
I think we spoke quite a lot about merging and people taking over other groups, and it would just be quite interesting to kind of maybe hear from people that have done that and what that experience has looked like, because certainly it's something that I would be loath to advise my members to do unless I heard somebody say it really worked for us, or it worked for us but we wish we'd done X, Y, and Z. So it'd be really interesting to hear from people that have gone through that and what that's kind of looked like for them. If that's not too much to ask, thank you very much. I appreciate every point you're saying.
Just some barriers. Mention barriers to that as well. So actually practical barriers, not just the
it's all culture and day-to-day stuff.
Something that came from, I think, Janine, was that we should showcase the links with other areas. So where there's been good partnerships between, her examples were NHS, public health, justice, etc., but even with the private sector, so get some really good examples to just inspire other partnerships to happen. And this one's maybe not so much workshops, but something that you could do is helping to promote and explain the third sector to Scotland, so that they understand how wide it is and how the fact that you turn up at your local scout group, for example, we were talking about, that means you're in the third sector, you're part of it. Turns out that actually 75% of Scotland is already in the third sector. Whatever the number might turn out to be. I'll challenge that just to be controversial. We've just been talking about bringing our whole self, and we talked a lot about labels and things. Actually, is it in 10 years' time that we need to have something that we define as a sector, or is it that we've gone past that? So, is it important to the man that volunteers with his scout group that he's part of the sector? No, he just enjoys working in the scout group. It doesn't matter where he works in the daytime, if he works for a charity or works for a limited company. It was a really good discussion at the gathering, and it was, why are we insisting on defining something by a legal status? Because we don't do that in other things, so why are we doing it with this? If we talk about the difference we make, I remember when Social Bite started and some people got their knickers in a twist about, well, actually it's not a proper social enterprise. Who gives a fuck? It's probably done more good. Now everyone's happy with it being called a social enterprise. But at that time, when they first started, it's like, well, technically it's just a limited company and they haven't asset locked, and all these, and it's just really, really interesting. What prejudices or bias, conscious and unconscious, have we got as individuals that are maybe holding back us doing good? And this sector definition one might be one of them.
But I think there is something that, if you're trying to explain more, because I don't want to get into the debate of it, but I wonder even whether it doesn't resonate with some people. Because it's like, so young people might think it's interesting, and not the non-profit side of it.
But in terms of
it's a
volunteer at Scout Group, they do it because they enjoy it and they like seeing the difference they make as an individual. Does it matter whether or not they know? And actually maybe it doesn't. I think I've just been around a long time and I've seen so much time spent. Do we call it the third sector or do we call it something else? And so much time has gone into that. Is it a distraction from actually the good that we want to see, the social change in society, with the world being a nicer kind of place to live?
So how do you hang on to your ethos then? Because I've worked now in the public and the private and now the third sector, and the ethos of each are quite different. And you know, I mean, the private holds his high on its ethos of being forward-thinking, innovation, making money. You know, it's you know what you're joining. You know, if you're going into that, and if you join the public sector, you have a sense of what you're
not
joining.
Right. So
So it's not the ethos. Forget about labels.
So, but I would challenge not every business, profit-making business, is forward-thinking, energetic. You know,
No,
or
but-
so actually not every third sector organisation is the same. But there's lots of third sector organisations that can be all those words that you've just associated with private. And we did the same in our group when we were discussing technology. There's loads of private sector organisations that are crap with technology. You know, it's not. It's not. So is it that these?
It's an ethos.
You know,
I was talking
so,
about ethos.
Yeah. So there's an ethos that's been around. The third sector needs to be more business-like. If only we can be more business-like and more efficient. You know, and those kind of. Actually, there's a lot of private sector organisations that aren't very efficient.
No,
Yeah.
I think it's hard to generalize, isn't it? So I wouldn't disagree with anything you said, but if you think about an ethos and where your values bases are and what is prominent in the value base, then surely that's a draw to people understanding what I'm joining. And it's about identity. I mean, so all those little niggly things, to me, that's not, take it beyond that and lift it up to a philosophical level of what we're anticipating. Because you do get people coming into different sectors, well, coming in from not being in the third sector and now working in it. It is fundamentally different than what I thought it would be. Fundamentally different. So what I thought I was joining or committing to is not what I thought it was. And I think that's the big experiential story, isn't it? But I'm just wondering whether I missed that bigger philosophy being shouted louder, because I think that attachment to that, and in terms of identity, in terms of your value base, because we're looking for kindness, then I think it's important to lift it and try and get that moving. And it's not that the private sector should do that either, but with this, I think we see ourselves as owning that.
And I think it's definitely something to consider as a trend. I think the boundaries are becoming more porous.
Yeah,
and I think we maybe do need to have a think about what that means, especially if we do want to have more partnerships. What are the shared things we can do? So it's
That seems to be something definitely worth exploring more.
It's not just
No.
it's not. It's actually much bigger than that.
And there isn't a word. I think Scotland a kinder place actually says it really nicely. Because at the beginning you were saying in 2030 every single person is involved in doing something to make this community better is our vision. But there wasn't a word to say. There wasn't really a description for it. Make community better, be kinder.
Shelley, might be worth mentioning our event on the 11th.
Was a fantastic plug there.
But Rashir's going to have to remind me what it is.
It's a charity one, of course.
Oh yeah, is this the charity brand one? Yeah, so our colleague Paul Bradley, the 11th, so not far away now, is doing an event on the charity brand. Unfortunately, can't remember much more details about it than that, so I don't have too much to say.
Well, it sparked off the back of the consultation that's currently ongoing by the Scottish Government on Oscar's powers and some of the changes they've requested to regulating charities. It's trying to look at the bigger picture here, that philosophical question to some extent. I mean, but also on a practical level, you know, what is the charity brand? How do we secure it? How do we make sure we maintain the trust that people have in what charities are? And does that mean you need to rethink some of what the charity law is in order to make that happen? So that conversation is taking place. It is the 11th, isn't it? I'll make sure you get that. But if you haven't registered for that, I think some people already have registered for it. If they haven't, then definitely worth. There'll be some of that kind of conversation taking place.
I can send the link round after this, and you can have a look, and if you're free, you can have a think about it. So before we finish up, I'll just give anyone who's not had a chance to say, like, is there anything else that you think we should be focused on that we've not said already? And I'm happy for people to contact me by email, because I know sometimes ideas happen after.
So what are your next steps with all of this?
Yeah, well, I think it will be to go through, get the wider notes from the other facilitators, to look for key themes, and then to use the key themes to try and find out, where we should focus based on that. So that will sort of be the starting point. So I'll be in touch once I have established that, yeah. But I think some of the things that have been suggested, like, a meeting around, people who've done mergers in the past and how it worked for them, I think that's a good idea. Showcase good partnerships is a good idea, and I think something that SBO already is in the process of doing some work on, so maybe we can share some information about that. And helping to promote and explain the third sector. I think we have some groups thinking about our policy forum and other work, and some work that Jenny's been doing as well, that I think, links to that. But yeah, we can probably do more, but we can share some of that work.
The young people strand is definitely what we want to follow up as well. We started doing some work on that just in terms of identity for young people working in sector, and started putting some feelers out and having a chat with young people's organisations in terms of producing some stuff about what young people maybe want to get out of the sector. So going beyond usual things. So yeah, we had a really interesting discussion in Ambrose and the Commons folks, so it'd be good to follow that up. We kind of stalled a bit, but it's definitely something there's an appetite to do.
Yeah. So I think watch this space. And
so just one other thing.
Yeah.
And the other conversation that seems to be getting a little bit of traction right now is around the value of the sector, which has also come out off the back of some of the work that Julie Unwin and her commission did, which obviously is with us, and the idea of do we need to rethink how we value and measure what the sector achieves? Because at the moment, maybe we're trying to just measure the bits that we think will get us the funding or the policy changes and so on. But maybe if we value the sector differently, then that could be used, and that could also be equally compelling, but also meaningful to us. So there's a bit of opportunity.
Has anyone last year as part of the Firestarter Festival, Toby Lowe came up from Northumbria University? Has anyone? So Toby Lowe, I think, is amazing. He is doing a lot of work in the public sector and various organisations in Scotland, looking at measuring what matters. So he fundamentally challenges outcomes, and it was really, really good workshop in which there were several organisations on the table who had a penny drop that we were measuring completely the wrong thing.
Was Diane Kennedy there? We met with Diane at the ESS, so she talked about Toby Lowe, the fact that if you have outcomes, that's all you do.
Measuring beyond outcomes.
When he wasn't quite framing it like that.
So she suggested inviting him along.
So he's coming up. Well, his team are coming up to the Change Convention that Cora are doing. It's a free event on the 28th of March, and there's a workshop at that which will be useful, I think, for anyone interested in that. Yeah, it's open. You can register. But they'll be talking about some work they've been doing with Lankelly Chase. And Lankelly Chase also joined some of our place program, so that's why we're bringing them up. But yeah, I think Toby Lowe's work is really useful. If you can't attend, then
if you want to share the details, then right, because people are interested in that, then I'll include it, in the email that comes after this.
So it's a bit extreme, like outcomes become targets and things like that. So I think Diane said it's not quite extreme. That's an interesting point to think about.
Moving around, I can't really explain it because he comes from an arts background, so he's quite full of life, and he had everyone moving around in the courtyard outside the new Register House at the end of Princes Street, and you had to pick someone to follow, and it was so interesting how he explained it, and it was just like everyone. I mean, there was someone from an organisation in Glasgow to say, well, we measure the success of whether or not we're improving litter by the number of tickets that we issue and fines for litter, but that doesn't tell us whether litter is going up or down. It just tells us whether or not we're issuing more fines, and how do we kind of unpick some of those. So it was really good.
Because as a sector, we do have a lot of outcomes that have intended or like peripheral. So what's the date for that?
28th of March. 28th. Yeah, unfortunately, it's the same day as the last report of the Carnegie Kindness stuff, so it's a bad clash.
Right, well, I think we'll finish up there because I'm aware that, you know, we've already been over time and people probably have other things to be.
But it's discussing it there.